The first reading is from the book of Exodus, the 16th chapter. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instructions." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, 'Draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining.'" And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, 'At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God.'" In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." The word of the Lord.
So, it's just bizarre. It's outrageous. In fact, it is totally crazy. The people of Israel, in today's first reading, are barely 6 weeks from being freed from bondage to the Egyptians, and already they begin to get nostalgic for the good old days of slavery. I mean, they say, "Wow, food great back there. And wasn't the bread just wonderful?" Of course, they were in a tough situation. They were in the middle of a desert where there wasn't much to eat. They had begun a journey, and they didn't know how long it would last. And they were transitioning to a land of milk and honey, but they weren't there yet. And it is the case that no matter how bad things were before in our lives, it's often the case that we miss what we've lost. After all, we don't know for sure what the future will hold for us, but we do know for sure the things that we've lost from the past. So the people of Israel complain, and God hears their complaining, and he gives them manna. Manna, a Hebrew word which literally means, "What the heck is this stuff?" And that is what they ask Moses when they see it on the ground. After all, this was neither the good bread they had in Egypt, nor the milk and honey of the promised land. What is it? What is this stuff? Now, sometimes when we describe something as manna from heaven, this is like manna from heaven, we idealize it as something heavenly and wonderful beyond compare of anything that we have ever experienced before. But in fact, this actual manna in the wilderness is simply the food that gets them through the journey. It is God's sustenance to keep them going through the stress and the transition of one place to another. It's really basic sustenance kind of food. Absolutely nobody ever eats this stuff, ever, in all the stories about manna, and says, "Wow, this is so much better than anything we've ever eaten. We'll just stay here and eat this stuff and leave the milk and honey to others." In fact, it's not too long before they start complaining about how boring the manna is and how much they detest it and how miserable it is, because it's just, basic stuff. I have a high school buddy who spent several decades in the Army after we got out of high school, and he was several times subjected to MREs, those meals ready to eat that they give to Army rations when you're in the field. And he said to me one time, he says, "They're better than some of the old rations that soldiers used to get, but absolutely nobody ever went home and said, 'Man, I got to get me some of this and take it home with me.' It just was basic stuff that you ate as a field ration." And basically, That's how we should look at this manna that ends up on the ground. It's a basic ration to help get people from one place to the next. This food, this manna from heaven in the wilderness, is also an invitation to live into a new routine and a new way of living, at least right now, in order to make it through the journey. There is a process that Moses outlines for the people for this manna. They're to gather it each day, and only enough for one day, except the day before the Sabbath, and they're going to learn to keep this up until they reach the land of milk and honey. And this is not always as easy as it sounds. Soon afterwards, people try to gather, a little extra just in case, and it rots. And they complain about the fact that they have to keep up this routine day after day after day. This is a really different and obnoxious routine from the routine they've had before, and yet it's the routine that gets them through the journey. And this manna in the wilderness is actually also itself a sign of hope that God is intent on accompanying them on this journey and bringing them through the transition. I mean, after all, God could have accommodated their complaining by letting them die. They begin this, right? Oh, that we in the God could have gone, okay, I'll let you die. But he didn't. He didn't. And because God didn't, it was a sign to them that he did indeed have a new day in store for them. And besides giving them physical strength to continue, the presence of manna each day was intended to give them the emotional and spiritual strength they needed to meet the day ahead. The manna that God gave the ancient Israelites was not this mystical stuff that gave them some kind of ecstatic experience. Rather, it was the stuff that helped them through a difficult transition, gave them strength for the journey, and served as a sign of hope for the future. And even so, the manna that God often provides in our lives is usually not some kind of mystical, ecstatic experience. Often, the manna in our lives isn't the thing that cures all of our woes. It doesn't solve all our problems, but it is the thing that God knows we need to help us through a difficult transition, give us strength for our journey, or serve as a sign of hope for the future. And it seems to me that sometimes manna is experienced as like a person or an opportunity that helps somebody deal with the stress, even if just for today. So while I was on vacation, I had a chance to visit several old friends who I hadn't seen in a while, and one of my old pastor buddies in particular, we sit down for lunch. We haven't seen each other in years, and he's like, this is just like we saw each other yesterday. We just pick up where we left off, and we sat there, and as we sat there and talked, we basically started to commiserate with each other about our various stresses for life lately and all the stuff that was going on that was bothering us and was difficult and hard. And as always, we did not solve any of our problems, but it was good to be able for us to sit together and to debrief. Sometimes the manna that you're looking for is as simple as that. The person, the event, the friend who helps you get through just today. So if you're looking for the manna of God in your life, sometimes it's as simple as asking, who has been manna in your life today? Who's the friend who's helped you today? How have you been manna in somebody else's life? What thing did you do where you said, this didn't seem to be a big deal, but somebody else said, yeah, but that was the thing that helped me out? That's the manna that God often gives to us. Manna, for us too, is often experienced as an opportunity or even a call to live differently, even if it's not really the way I want to live permanently. But that different routine or different adaptation is what's needed to get through this part of the journey. And often it's not clear how long that routine will last. And sometimes I get resistant to the routine, or even hearing that there's a routine because I don't know how long that will last, and it seems difficult and or at least obnoxious. So one of my other friends that I got a chance to visit on vacation has been going through cancer treatment for a couple of years now. And the good news is that the treatment that she's been going through right now, the doctors said to her a couple of weeks ago, you know, what we're doing seems to be helping, we think. So our recommendation is we keep it up for another 3 months, and then we'll see where we go from there. On the one hand, that's good, because it's sort of working. On the other hand, when people tell me those kinds of, like, here's a routine you got to keep up with, but we don't know when the end is in sight, that frustrates me. I don't want to have to keep doing it. It's like the ancient Israelites being told, keep gathering the bread until you get to the land of milk and honey. How long? Oh, no. And the routine isn't fun. And the routine isn't really something that I want to keep doing. But sometimes those new and different routines, they're the ways that God is giving us to get through whatever the stress or the transition is right at this moment. And sometimes manna in our life is the invitation to live into a routine that maybe we don't want to live into, because we know that this is God's way of leading us through the wilderness that we're in at the moment. And sometimes manna for us, most importantly, should be experienced as a sign of hope. Recognizing the manna in our lives, even when our initial reaction is, what the heck is this stuff, is an opportunity to realize that God is with us on our journey and really is helping us towards a new and better place. In our gospel reading for today, people ask Jesus what they need to do the works of God. Yet Jesus responds that even faith itself, believing in Jesus, is God's work. That is, it's the result of God working in our lives to give us courage to keep up the journey. And sometimes the most important thing that can happen when we recognize manna in our lives, when we recognize that God's presence has been there through a friend or a new routine or simply a sign of hope, it's that it gives us hope and it points us to a future so that we can keep moving through whatever wilderness experience we may be living through at the moment. You know, in the story of Exodus, God gave the people this manna to get them through their wilderness experience. Eventually, when they reached the promised land, the stuff on the ground ceased to appear. But God's help and presence in the midst of trouble never ended. And that's true for us too. And this story isn't just the story about stuff on the ground one time for an ancient people. Instead, it's a story that reminds God's people in all times and in all places that God is always working to give us the manna we need to help us through difficult transitions, to give us strength for our wilderness journeys, and to give us signs of hope for the future. Amen.